The smell of fresh paint was still in the hallway when I pulled into my own driveway and saw the locksmith's van. It was a Tuesday afternoon, cool for October, and the wind carried the faint metallic scent of rain that had not yet arrived. I sat in my truck for a moment, engine idling, watching a man I did not know kneeling at my front door with a drill. My stepson Kyle stood behind him with his arms crossed, giving instructions like he owned the place. I stepped out of the truck. Kyle did not flinch. He looked at me the way you look at a delivery driver who arrived too early. "You don't live here anymore," he said. "Mom and I talked about it. We're changing the locks." I did not shout. I did not drop what I was carrying. I stood on the walkway I had poured myself 3 summers ago and felt the ground shift beneath me. Not physically, but in every other way that mattered. My jaw tightened. My hands went still at my sides. He had no idea what he had just set in motion. My name is Gerald Tate. I was 53 years old when the locks on my own house were changed without my knowledge or consent. I had spent 26 years working in municipal compliance, the kind of job most people could not describe at a dinner party if their life depended on it. Permit reviews, inspection reports, zoning variances. I wore dress shirts with no tie and drove a pickup that always had a clipboard on the passenger seat. It was not glamorous work, but it was precise, and I was good at it. I married Sandra when I was 37. She had Kyle from a previous relationship. He was 11 at the time, quiet, angry at the world in a way I understood because I had once been that boy myself. I did not try to replace his father. I simply showed up. I helped with homework. I drove him to basketball practice. I paid for the braces, the summer camps, the first car. I never once asked for thanks, and I never once received it. The marriage was stable on the surface, the way a house can look solid from the street even when the foundation has been cracking for years. Sandra managed the social calendar. She managed the opinions. She managed who spoke at dinner and who listened. I listened. I let her redecorate the living room without asking. I let her mother stay for 6 weeks without being consulted. I let Kyle move back in at 27 after his lease fell through, and I said nothing when he converted my workshop in the garage into his bedroom. I let it go. I let a lot go. There were small moments I should have examined more carefully. The way Sandra would talk about household finances as though I were a tenant contributing rent. The way Kyle would open the refrigerator I had stocked, scan the shelves, and complain there was nothing to eat. The way my name disappeared from conversations about the house, as though the mortgage paid itself. I would come home after 10 hours reviewing building plans, set my keys on the counter, and feel like a guest in my own kitchen. But I told myself this was partnership. I told myself accommodation was maturity. I confused silence with peace and called it a good marriage. The day it unraveled had started with a dentist appointment. That is the absurd part. I left work early for a cleaning, and because the office was close to home, I decided to stop by and grab a jacket before heading back. I was not expected. That was the problem. When I pulled onto our street, I saw the van first, white, unmarked, parked right behind Sandra's car. Then I saw the locksmith at the door. Then I saw Kyle standing on my porch, directing the operation as though he were the foreman on a job site. "You don't live here anymore," he said again when I asked what was happening. He said it with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed the line. Sandra appeared behind the screen door. She was holding a glass of water, sipping it slowly, as if the scene on the porch were no more interesting than a weather report. "Gerald," she said, "we think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay for a while. Kyle needs the space, and honestly, things haven't been working." "Things haven't been working," I repeated. "You're never really here anyway," she said, "not in the ways that matter." Kyle shifted his weight, looked at the locksmith and said, "Can you keep going? We want this done today." The locksmith looked at me. He could see my name was on the mailbox. He hesitated. "It's fine," I said. I do not know why I said that. Perhaps because I had spent 16 years saying things were fine when they were not. Sandra adjusted her cardigan and said something to Kyle I could not hear. He laughed. Not cruelly exactly, but with a carelessness that made my sternum ache like someone had pressed a fist into it. I stood there, holding my jacket, watching my own front door get fitted with hardware I would not have a key to. I could have argued. I could have called the police right then. Instead, I turned and walked back to my truck. I placed both hands on the steering wheel. My knuckles went white. My breathing was measured, slow, deliberate, the way you breathe when you are trying to keep something inside your chest from breaking loose. That was the moment something inside me went quiet. I drove to a motel 6 miles from the house, a place off the highway with thin curtains and a parking lot that smelled like diesel. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time without removing my shoes. The room was small. There was a lamp with a crooked shade, a television bolted to the dresser, and a window that overlooked a strip of dead grass between the building and the road. It was the kind of room where you sit and take inventory of what just happened, and that is exactly what I did. I did not feel angry. I felt focused. I opened my phone and began taking screenshots. Every text Sandra had sent over the past 6 months, every message from Kyle, every receipt I could find for mortgage payments, utility bills, property taxes, home repairs. I opened my banking app and studied the transaction history. I opened the county assessor's website and pulled up the deed to the house. My name was on it, only my name. Sandra and I had never added her to the title. I called a man named Ray Alderman. We had played on the same recreational softball league 8 years ago, and I knew he practiced family law. I kept the call to 4 minutes. "They changed the locks on your house?" he said. "Your house. Your name on the deed." "Yes," I said. "Do not go back yet," he said. "Come see me tomorrow morning. Bring everything." I hung up and sat in the silence of that motel room. It was not a broken silence. It was a working silence, the kind of quiet that comes when a man stops reacting and starts thinking. Silence was not surrender. It was preparation. Ray Alderman's office was on the second floor of a brick building downtown, above a bakery that filled the stairwell with the smell of sourdough. I arrived at 8:15 the next morning, carrying a folder I had organized the night before. He looked at the deed. He looked at the mortgage statements. He looked at the text messages. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Gerald, you own that house outright. They cannot change the locks on property they do not own. That is not a domestic dispute. That is trespassing." I checked the time. It was 9:47 a.m. We spent the next 2 hours building a strategy. Ray explained that because Sandra and I were legally married, she had certain occupancy rights, but Kyle did not. Kyle was a 27-year-old adult with no lease, no rental agreement, and no legal claim to the property. He had hired a locksmith to change the locks on a house that belonged to someone else. "We file for a formal eviction notice for the stepson," Ray said, "and we begin the divorce proceedings simultaneously." My phone buzzed. A text from Sandra. "We need to talk about this like adults." I screenshotted it and set the phone down. That afternoon, I went to the bank. I separated the joint checking account into 2 individual accounts. I redirected my paycheck deposit. I flagged every automatic payment tied to the house, the mortgage, the insurance, the utilities, and ensured they continued from my account alone. The house was mine. I would maintain it. But I stopped funding the credit cards Sandra used for discretionary spending. By 4:02 p.m., I received the first alert. Transfer blocked, insufficient funds. Sandra had tried to make a purchase and the card had declined. My phone began ringing within minutes. I did not answer. Over the next 3 days, Ray filed the eviction notice for Kyle and served it through proper legal channels. He also filed the initial divorce petition. I continued staying at the motel, not because I had to, but because every day I was away, the situation clarified itself further. Sandra left voicemails. The first was measured. The second was strained. The third was sharp. "You're being petty, Gerald. You're punishing Kyle for something that was my idea. Call me back." I saved every recording. I did not respond to a single one. Kyle sent a text on the 4th day. "You're seriously going to evict me? Over some locks?" I did not reply. On the fifth day, Sandra's mother called. Her voice carried the particular authority of a woman who believes she was the final word in all family matters. "Gerald, you are tearing this family apart. Sandra is beside herself. You need to come home and stop this nonsense." I let the voicemail finish. I forwarded it to Ray. By the end of the first week, Ray had obtained a court order granting me immediate re-entry to the property and requiring the locks to be restored or new keys provided to me within 48 hours. The order also formally began Kyle's eviction process, giving him 30 days to vacate. I checked the time when the order was signed. It was 11:15 a.m. on a Thursday. I was sitting in Ray's office, and the bakery downstairs had switched from sourdough to cinnamon rolls. The sweetness drifted up through the floor vents like a small, unearned kindness. Ray slid the court order across the desk. "This is what happens when people confuse your patience with permission," he said. That evening, a police officer accompanied me to the house to execute the order. I stood on the porch I had built and watched as a different locksmith, one I had hired, installed new locks. Sandra watched from the living room window. Kyle was not home. The officer was calm, professional. He handed Sandra a copy of the order and explained her rights as an occupant during the pending divorce. She nodded, her face tight, her fingers gripping the doorframe. I walked inside for the first time in 6 days. The house smelled like lavender, a candle Sandra always kept burning in the hallway. Everything was where I had left it, except the feeling. The feeling was different now. I moved through each room the way you walk through a building you are inspecting, not with nostalgia, but with clarity. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday, 3 weeks later, in a conference room at Ray's firm. Sandra brought her own attorney, a woman with a leather portfolio who spoke in careful sentences. Kyle was not present, but his absence filled the room like an uninvited guest. Sandra looked different, not defeated, not yet, but quieter. She wore a blouse I recognized, dark blue, the one she usually saved for church. She kept her hands folded on the table. Her attorney opened with a proposal. Sandra would retain the house, Gerald would pay temporary spousal support, and the matter of Kyle's eviction would be reconsidered. Ray opened his folder. He placed the deed on the table, then the mortgage records, then the 16 years of payment history, then the screenshots, Kyle's texts, Sandra's voicemails, the locksmith receipt that Kyle had paid for with Sandra's credit card, which was funded entirely by my income. He laid each document down the way a man lays bricks, one at a time, level and square. Sandra's attorney reviewed the documents in silence. She leaned over and whispered something to Sandra. Sandra's jaw tightened. "The house is in Mr. Tate's name alone," Ray said. "It has been since the date of purchase. Mrs. Tate was never added to the title. The mortgage has been paid exclusively from Mr. Tate's earnings. The eviction of Kyle Marsh is lawful and procedurally sound. And the act of changing the locks on a property you do not own, while the owner is away, is not a domestic disagreement. It is a legal event." Sandra looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were damp, and there was something in them I had not seen in years. Not anger, not calculation, but genuine uncertainty. For a moment, she was not the woman who had stood behind a screen door, sipping water while my life was dismantled. She was someone who had made a decision without understanding its weight. "Gerald," she said quietly, "I didn't think it would go this far." I held her gaze. "You chose who mattered," I said, "when you stood behind that door and watched." I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked out of the room before anyone could respond. Ray followed with the folder. The hallway was cool and silent. I did not look back. The following week, I had the house repainted. Not because it needed it, but because I wanted every wall to feel like a decision I had made. I chose a warm gray for the living room, a color Sandra never would have approved. I moved my desk back into the garage workshop and set it by the window where the morning light came through strongest. Kyle moved out on day 28 of his 30-day notice. He left without speaking to me. I found a note on the kitchen counter that said, "This wasn't how it was supposed to go." I read it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer. It was not an apology, but it was the closest thing to honesty he had offered me in years. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. The house remained mine. The terms were fair, not generous, not vindictive, just clear. Sandra moved to an apartment across town. We did not speak again after the final hearing. On the first morning after everything was settled, I made coffee in a kitchen that was finally, fully mine. The sun came through the window above the sink and landed on the counter in a clean rectangle of light. The house was quiet. Not the silence of something missing, but the silence of something returned. I did not feel triumphant. I felt unburdened. Like a man who had been carrying a suitcase for 16 years and only just realized he was allowed to set it down. Silence is not always loss. Sometimes it is the sound of a man rebuilding the room he was locked out of. If you had been in my place, would you have fought on the porch that day? Or would you have walked away and let the silence do the work? Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. Your presence here means more than you know. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe. Let us keep walking this road together.